Hey, it's Lou, and here's the thing. Innovation and technology make the world go round. They fuel economic growth, medical breakthroughs, and increasingly, they play a huge role in our social lives. Now, the tech that has the biggest impact on society, that goes mainstream, largely depends on a small segment of the population called early adopters. A new product or service has to impress these tastemakers. If not, a promising innovation is headed for the same fate as the Apple Newton. If you don't know what that is, well, that's sort of my whole point. So, who are early adopters? And if everyone is trying to cater to them and their taste, what are we missing? How do innovations catch on? Well, there's this time-honored model called the technology adoption lifecycle. Before a product goes mainstream, it has to get past the gatekeepers. That's the innovators and the early adopters. Innovators are a very small but influential group. They are the nerds, folks who like tech for tech's sake. Geoffrey Moore, whose famous book Crossing the Chasm explores the tech adoption lifecycle, told me innovators are the type of people who bought an early model Fitbit not because they were training or trying to lose weight, but because they like experiencing new innovation and understanding how it works. They like opening things up and tinkering. Steve Wozniak is an innovator. His partner, the visionary Steve Jobs, fits into the early adopter profile. That is, people who might not understand all the technical details on a new innovation, but who see the potential impact. Lee Rainey, director of Internet and Technology Research at Pew, told me early adopters tend to be younger, wealthier, and better educated than the rest of the population. Research also shows early adopters like taking risks. They value being unique. They have a high social status, and people listen to them. They read more news outlets, so they're attuned to the cutting edge. They tend to be cosmopolitan. Geoffrey Moore told me there's a simpler way to understand it. Early adopters are the cool kids, the real trendsetters, and Moore pointed out, the internet and YouTube in particular has given a megaphone to these opinion leaders. That's obviously why brands send their new products to influencers. In the mail today, for instance, I received, well, nothing. Someone once sent me a book, but anyway, the fact that early adopters are wealthier than the rest of the population makes sense. New products can have bugs. They could turn out to be busts. So you need to be in a financial position where wasting a few $100 on a new gadget that turns out to be shitty isn't that big of a deal. Moore told me early adopters often have a drawer full of fads that never really panned out. Which reminds me, sometimes the cool kids wind up looking pretty lame. The early adopters sporting Google Glass, for instance, were often ridiculed. So there's a gamble that a purchase made to gain cachet and social standing backfires and you wind up looking like a doofus. Although early adopters tend to be open-minded, so maybe they don't care. Being humiliated is often the risk of being bold. Now, if you're broke, it may be frustrating that you can't afford cutting-edge stuff, but price-insensitive early adopters sort of subsidize products for the rest of us. J.P. Eggers, a professor of management and organizations at NYU, told me to think about early Teslas. They were luxury vehicles with hefty price tags, but that cash flow from well-off early adopters sustained Tesla long enough to A, pursue cheaper vehicles, and B, build out a charging station infrastructure. Eggers told me that's why young products are often so expensive. The first consumers are buying all the work that goes into funding future, more efficient iterations. So, early adopters get the word out, they're willing to tolerate bugs, and their big bucks will help with future development. That's quite an attractive customer. But the fear is, in order to accommodate the high-end taste of early adopters, will companies only pursue shiny objects? And since early adopters are the ones providing the first round of feedback on a product, will the product develop to suit their specific needs? In other words, will innovation only serve the whims of wealthy, well-educated, risk-taking urbanites?
Here it is. Mavic Pro 2.1, Mavic Pro 2.2.
Rita McGrath, a professor at Columbia Business School, told me this problem is compounded when you consider the type of people working on tech and innovation in Silicon Valley. That is, wealthy, well-educated, risk-taking urbanites. The relative uniformity of creator and customer can create blind spots. Problems that plague the elderly or the poor or the uneducated may not be on the radar of the people best equipped to create tech solutions for them. And keep in mind, Pew data indicates that early adopters skew male. Silicon Valley is by and large made of men. Are the tech needs of women being overlooked? Ditto with minority groups who are underrepresented in the tech industry. That's not just a societal problem, that can also be untapped markets. From a business perspective, this is all connected to the challenge of moving from left to right on the technology adoption lifecycle. How do you get past early adopters and move into the majority? This is what Moore means when he talks about crossing the chasm. Eggers argues that you have to focus on the customers you want, not the customers you have. So products should eventually develop away from the taste of early adopters and towards generic mass appeal, towards things that are easier to use and more practical. Problem is, as more and more people get on board, the cool kids start to feel a little claustrophobic and a little uncool. A lot of us early Facebook users felt this way when we got a friend request from our mothers. But to bring in the big bucks, companies have to make compromises. It's like when a trendy label moves into Walmart. You can say they sold their soul, but at least they got a good price. Some companies try to strike a balance between early adopters and mass appeal by offering new products. Eggers told me that as the iPhone became more popular, Apple introduced the Apple Watch. Now, when I first started researching this piece, I sort of hoped to discover that I was an early adopter, that I was a cool kid. When Moore and I were discussing the life cycle, I remarked, going from left to right is pretty much going from young to old, from wealthy to poor, from smart to dumb. Now, in my defense, data indicates that that's sort of generally crudely true, but Moore, very warmly, he's a very nice guy, said that that characterization is a combination of the arrogance of youth and the arrogance of intellect. He pointed out that the majority is the most pragmatic. They may have a herd mentality, but we shouldn't mock a herd mentality. After all, it's a very successful survival strategy. So if someone else is willing to break away and take the risk of investing in a piece of tech that might fail, that might make them look stupid, fine. Maybe they have better resources and can serve as our guinea pig. We can sit back and see what happens. We can wait for the price to fall, like it has with everything from televisions to toaster ovens to Teslas. So perhaps it's better to be late adopters or laggards. Those folks aren't swayed by the emotion and the self-congratulations associated with being first. Rather, they're more concerned with rational criteria. Does it work? Is it sustainable? Do I have an actual use for it? I mean, cool is often inferior to practical. Of course, there are going to be times when we want to break away from the herd. For those of us without the luxury of limitless disposable income, we should probably select our spots. As Eggers told me, we're all early adopters of something. Music, movies, fashion trends, websites, even YouTube channels. Which is a reminder, please subscribe. Okay, I'm gonna go live my life. Geoffrey Moore, whose famous book Crossing the Chasm, Chasm, whose book Crossing the Chasm, his book Crossing the Chasm, his book Crossing the Chasm,